Good evening. Good evening and welcome. It is so joyful to see this room so full. Thank you for being here. I'm Hannah Weissman, the Executive Director of the Magnes Collection of Jewish Art and Life. Thank you. It's my pleasure to welcome you all tonight and to introduce our speaker. But before we begin, please take a moment to silence any devices you have that might make noise during the program, and take note of our emergency exits at the front and back of the room. The Magnes, if you're new here, is a museum and research center dedicated to generating new knowledge and understanding of Jewish cultures around the world. And we do that through the unparalleled collections of art, objects, texts, and music that are in our care. Tonight's program is offered in conjunction with our current exhibition, In Plain Sight, Jewish Arts and Lives in the Muslim World. And our programming series, including tonight's, brings members of our communities together to consider themes and topics in the exhibition from a variety of angles. If you've not yet had a chance to see the exhibition, I invite you to return another day so that you can take time with the stories, objects, and artworks that are on view. As a community-supported museum, the Magnes relies on philanthropy to make our work possible. We're grateful for your generosity, which allows us to create new exhibitions and programs like this, and to thrive as a space for gathering, teaching, learning, and creative expression. Please consider including the Magnes among the organizations you support. Creating and hosting programs like tonight's takes a whole team. Please join me in thanking Rabbi Chaim from Afikomen Judaica and Bookshop, and my esteemed Magnes colleagues Ahinoam Altubi, Mariela Barcinas, Laura Bratt, Keith Hernandez, Ian Mitchell, Eliza Ravet, Olivia Vasquez, and especially Dan Alter for making tonight's program possible. And now it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce our speaker, whose program we here on staff have been eagerly awaiting since last summer. Hélène Jawhara Piñer has a PhD in medieval history and the history of food. Her research includes the medieval culinary history of Spain through inter- and multiculturalism, with a special focus on Jewish culinary heritage written in Arabic, a direct tie to our exhibition. Dr. Jawhara Piñer teaches medieval history at Bordeaux-Montaigne University and University de Tours. She's been awarded the Broome Allen Fellowship from the American Sephardi Federation in 2018, the David Gitlitz Emerging Scholar Prize from the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies in 2021, and a visiting research fellowship by the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries in 2024. She's the author of 3 books that I hope you'll pick up tonight from Afikomen: Sephardi Cooking the History, Recipes of the Jews of Spain and the Diaspora from the 13th Century to Today, Jews, Food, and Spain, the oldest medieval Spanish cookbook and the Sephardic Culinary Heritage, and most recently, Matzah and Flour, Recipes from the History of the Sephardic Jews, even if we are still in denial that Passover is right around the corner. She hosts the live culinary show Sephardic Culinary History with Chef Hélène Jawhara Piñer, and is a member of Foodish Advisory Board of Anu Museum in Tel Aviv. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jawhara Piñer to the Magnes.
Dear everyone, it's a real pleasure and honor to be here at the Magnes for this lecture, talk, conversation, tasting. I am very proud to be here, and I would like to thank the Magnes. I would like to thank in particular Dan and Hannah and Javi and everyone, and Laura, and everyone who gave a hand to make this event happen. I am so happy to be here to talk about a theme that I really love to talk about. I mean food. Yeah, obviously. I'm Sephardic, so obviously I like talking about food and eating. And but I really love is talking about Jewish history and the history of the Jews of Spain and the diaspora through food. I think this is a great way to understand history and a very accurate way to understand history for its complexity. So tonight we are going to talk about the text you can taste, the Sephardic Culinary Heritage. For this, we really need to have a starting point, because if we talk about the heritage, obviously we want to know since when we can talk about this. So we are going to talk about the Jews of Spain. We are going to talk about the Sephardim. So maybe one of your questions could be, well, what's the difference? So the Sephardim are the Jews of Spain. Yes, you're right. But this is just a question of a period. So we use the word Sephardim to refer to the Jews of Spain and the diaspora after 1492. Everybody knows here the relevance of 1492, you know. Before 1492, we use the word Jews of Spain to refer to the Jews of Spain. And after the Sephardim, that includes the diaspora. So to talk about the Sephardic culinary heritage, we are going to talk about the Jewish people from Sepharad, so from Spain, using a very special kinds of sources. Obviously, the first source, maybe the more accurate or the first in which we are thinking about, is the cookbook. And then we're going to talk about other kinds of texts that deal with the history of the Sephardim and the food that those kinds of sources reveal about the practices, the food practices mainly. So all in all, we are going to talk about the Sephardic culinary heritage. What is the Sephardic culinary heritage? How this heritage has been built on the longue durée, so the long period, the long time, because this is something that we really need to take into account. We cannot talk about heritage without taking into account the longue durée, the long period. Let's start with this. So this is what was the historical context of Spain before 711. At that time, to be clear, at that time, small communities were living in Spain. Romans, obviously, they were Catholics. Then we have Jewish communities, obviously, since the 2nd century. We know about this because I agree with you. Maybe some of you say, okay, but maybe there were Jews before the 2nd century. Yes, but as an historian, I take the evidences. So the first evidence we have concerning the presence of Jews in Spain at that time in the 2nd century is a grave that has been found in the south of Spain, in Andalusia. So we can say that there were Jewish communities at that time in Spain. Then the other community, and the most important, unfortunately, one, were the Visigoths. So a German tribe that obviously did not like at all the Jews. For the pogroms mainly that happened, in fact, mainly in 611. And then very small Byzantine communities who were Orthodox. Why 711 is a very important period? Because at that time, and only at that time, came the Muslims. So before 711, there were no Muslims in Spain. This is important. This is a pivotal year because since this time, the Berber from mainly what we call Ifriqiya, so northern Morocco and Tunisia, just came along with the Arabs from the Arabic Peninsula, and they invaded Spain in 711. The Jews were more or less or more happy than everything when the Muslims came, because they were living under very, very hard, complex, and very bad situation under the Visigoths. And we know that the Golden Ages were for the Jews and Muslims happened in the 11th and 10th century. Nevertheless, if we talk about the text that can or that could have referred to the food practices of the Jews of Spain during that period, we do not have. We will have to wait a bit to have the evidence of a very special cuisine, or at least food practices of the Jews during that time. So the first source, obviously for anyone who can reveal maybe the best what was the cuisine of the Jews at that time, is a cookbook. We have to wait the 13th century to have the first cookbook, the oldest cookbook written in the West. This is a cookbook. It's an anonymous cookbook. It bears the name Kitab al-Tabir or Kitab al-Tabr in Arabic, which means literally the cookbook. Nothing original, right? But you know, it's a cookbook, so nothing surprising. This cookbook has been found in the south of Spain, in Andalusia, in the 13th century. And it is a unique witness to complex and very, very complex realities. This cookbook is very special, but I'm not going to tell you why right now. Just have to wait the third slide. The second cookbook that has been written really few decades after the Kitab al-Tabir, after the cookbook, is the Fudalat al-Hiwan. This is very interesting because this cookbook has been written by someone we know. Who is the author? The author is called Ibn Razim al-Tujibi. He's Muslim, and it's a cookbook written in Arabic as well, also in the 13th century, but just a bit after the first and oldest medieval cookbook. This cookbook, I'm not going to say it has nothing to do with the first one, but nevertheless, it's a bit like that. So it contains recipes more in relation with the Middle East and other recipes that are that we cannot find absolutely in the first cookbook, but you still do not know why. The third one is called the Saint Sauvy. This one is absolutely totally different. So it has been written at the beginning of the 14th century. It's also anonymous, but has been written in Catalan and under Christian domination. This changed everything. There are lard everywhere in the recipes. This is important because we are going to talk about it after. So keep in mind, we are here in the 13th century. What do we know about food practices, Jewish cuisine of the Jews of Spain at that time? Well, first, let's ask us several questions. This leads us to ask you several questions. We love asking questions, right? So let's ask us three questions. What does the study of the food practices of the Jews in the 13th century reveal about the social and political context of Spain? How does this help to a better understanding of the food heritage of today's Spain? Obviously, there are consequences. Why is it relevant to discuss Sephardic cuisine today? So we have been talking about the first source, the cookbook, that could be the first evidence of something that you do not know. But I just want to say that this cookbook is really the first evidence of the existence of a Jewish cuisine. So this means a cuisine of the Jews, which is identified as a cuisine that is totally different. Another cuisine, it could be the cuisine of the other. So this is the Kitab al-Tabir. At that time, we are in the 13th century. Unfortunately, bad things started to happen for the Jews at that time. Everything was quite good between Jews and Muslims until the 11th century. In the 11th century, what happened? A Berber dynasty from Morocco called the Almoravides started to invade Spain, and they totally erased what the Muslims, the Umayyads, were doing previously, because they were considering that the Arab Jews. When I say the Arab Jews, I think that I refer to the Arab from the Arabic Peninsula. So at that time, the Almoravides who invaded Spain were thinking that the Umayyads were not enough dogmatic. So they decided just to win everything, to win the country, and they started to rule Spain. It was a bit bad because we know that in 1066, some pogroms started to happen in Granada, so southeast Spain. But the worst came after. So in the 12th century, the second Berber dynasty came and started to rule Spain. They were the Almohads. Since that time, a lot of people, Jewish people, but also Muslims, could not live anymore if they were not very fervent practicant of Islam. So this is exactly at that time when the Rambam, Moses Maimonides, had to flee Spain, but also Averroes, who was Muslim, but he could not live anymore under this Muslim domination, which was very dogmatic. And this is exactly, and this is very important to mention, this is exactly during that period that the Kitab al-Tabigh was written. So under a very hard time for everywhere who was not Muslim. So the Kitab al-Tabigh is the oldest cookbook from the West. It contains 462 recipes of dishes, because there are some recipes that are for making perfumes or soap or things like this. But 462 recipes of dishes. And this is the oldest one in the world that contains explicitly 6 Jewish recipes. This requires renovation. Okay. So it contains 6 explicitly Jewish recipes. When I say that, I mean that in the title of the recipe, the word in Arabic, the word Yehud or Yehudi, is mentioned in the title of the recipe. This is a bit bizarre, right? So we are in a very dogmatic context which was very bad for the Jews, and we have 6 explicitly Jewish recipes in this cookbook. So we can ask ourselves some questions, right? So I'm going to talk about this after. So in this cookbook of 462 recipes for dishes, there are different chapters, and what that we maybe have to pay attention to is the chapters that deal with eggplants, for example, because this is something that I've been working on different cookbooks from the Middle East and obviously from Spain. And this is the only one that contains an eggplant chapter. But as Sephardim, we love eggplants. So this is the starting point, right, of food. So among the 6 explicitly Jewish recipes, so I just wrote the title in Arabic. So for those who can read Arabic, it's quite easy. For everyone, I wrote it in English. And for the Spanish people, I'm Spanish as well. So I was very proud to write it in Spanish as well. So the first explicitly Jewish recipe is a recipe for chicken. So one can read Lun min farouj Yehudi, so a Jewish dish of chicken. And the second one is also a recipe of chicken, Jewish dish of chicken. But the difference, because there is a difference, the 2 recipes are totally different. The first one, the chicken has stuffing inside, so it's a whole chicken, entire chicken. And in the second one, the chicken is cut. Recipe number 3, it's a recipe for partridge, Jewish partridge. That's the same process. In the third one, there is stuffing inside the partridge. Yes, it's a small bird, but there is stuffing inside. And in the fourth one, the partridge is cut. The fifth and sixth Jewish recipes are, I think, to me, the more intriguing because the fifth one is a stuffed buried Jewish dish. I'm going to show you because as a chef, I just recreated those recipes. And it really looks like a big cake made with meatballs and a lot of eggs. When I say a lot of eggs, it's like 30 eggs. Yes, we love eggs, right? And the last one is a recipe called a Jewish dish of eggplants stuffed with meat. And this meat is lamb. So we can ask ourselves, okay, so at that time when in the 13th century, what did the Jews decided to use as ingredients to make their recipes? In 67%, they used entrails like liver, for example, chopped liver. You like chopped liver. They used vinegar for the sour taste and acidity, and when we are gonna speak a bit concerning this. And they used rose water. Rose water, this is a bit surprising because rose water is more food that is used in the Middle Eastern territories, but nevertheless, we have this in 67% of the recipes. In 83%, we have onions, mint, cinnamon, salt, and pine nuts. And in all the recipes, you have oil. Obviously, it's olive oil. There is a reason why. For this. You have eggs, very important, and there is also a reason why for this. When I say reason, I mean an historical reason. Meat, nuts, indeed, and this wonderful herb, cilantro. You're not Sephardic if you do not like cilantro. But this is something interesting because when the Christians started to rule the country, Spain, okay, so officially and definitely since 1492, they decided to erase everything, every dishes, and in all the cookbooks that they wrote when they were ruling the country, and they decided to use another herb. Exactly. Yes. Parsley. Yes. We're gonna talk about this after. So this is how it looks like a recipe from the cookbook. So it's quite easy to read for those who read Arabic. But you can read it here. So it's quite easy to read, and the only thing maybe that could be we should pay attention to is the process. In fact, in the Jewish recipes, from the 13th century onward, and even in Inquisition trial, we're going to talk about this, the process is sometimes even more important than the food which is used in the recipes. So here you have clean the chicken. So we always have to start with the meat. The meat is so important. And then at the end, you have the way for the presentation. So you really want the dish to look very good and very tasty. So here are the photos concerning, this is the final result of it, in fact. So you have the chicken, the whole one, cat, the partridge, the Jewish dish of partridge. This is interesting. The fourth one, I did not. In the first one, you have a very short sentence in the process of the recipe that calls for using the eggs, the hard-boiled eggs, cut it to half, and what you really want to do is just to place them as if it was a star. So, we know, right? I do not have to give you more detail about this. So, the fifth one is a stuffed buried Jewish dish. It really looks like a cake made with different layers of omelets, more than 30 eggs here. In the middle, you have ground meat, lamb, and meatballs also with lamb. There is also a reason why we are using lamb. And the sixth one, it's this one. So you see that the eggplants have been cooked, and we use the flesh. We mixed with a stuffing with lamb, grounded lamb, and you just have to just place it again and to cover with breadcrumbs and to use egg yolks only. So this is how the recipes, the 6 specific Jewish recipes looked like at that time in the 13th century. But the question is, so what were the Jewish and Muslim food practices and the cooking practices of those two people in the Kitab al-Tabikh, in the cookbook? Because we have to keep in mind that this cookbook has been written under Muslim domination. But what is really surprising is that the author, which is anonymous, even nowadays, I've spent the two first years of my PhD doctorate, of my 6 years PhD doctorate, working only on this source. I promise you that we do not know the identity of this author, but I promise you that he was very, very knowledgeable concerning the Jewish food practices and the laws of the kashrut. Funny, right? So at that time, in the 13th century, and even before, Jews and Muslims were sharing culinary practices, food practices. They had dishes that were quite similar. Nevertheless, how we can make this difference between the two food cultures, it's when they had to celebrate their holidays. The celebration of holidays is, in fact, what allowed us to understand that there were two different cuisines. But in the cookbook in the 13th century, we have different elements, characteristics that we should just take a moment to think about. We have bread, a lot of different kinds of bread. Nevertheless, in this cookbook, you can find bread that is unleavened bread. You also have a recipe, very interesting recipe, and this recipe is the only one I just wrote, 11 cookbooks written in the Christian domination, and also cookbooks written in the Middle East. This is the only one that has a recipe which is made with flour, with yeast, with a lot of eggs and water. And this recipe says that you really have to knead very well the dough. And then you have to make 3 different balls. And then you have to make some strands. And then you have to braid it. This is really funny, right? So this recipe is very special. I wrote an article on this because it really just caught my attention. And this recipe is really looking like what is now challah. But this recipe had some lavender inside, and the braided bread is fried. Yes, you have the recipe in my first cookbook. The other thing that is also interesting is that in this cookbook, you have recipes that contain wine. Under a very Islamic domination, this would not have been possible if the author was Muslim. So the recipe that says that, if you're a good Muslim, you should substitute wine by honey. By honey? Okay, why not? So you have no recipes with pork, obviously because Jews and Muslims do not eat pork. But what is very interesting is that you remember when we were talking about the Jewish recipe of chicken? So I was just telling you that the first element is what you want to do is to clean the meat and, to start with something in relation with the meat. Well, you know what? you have some of the recipes and many recipes in this cookbook that calls for salting the meat. The meat has to be salted. This is absolutely not a Muslim practice. The Muslims do not have to salt the meat. Only the Jews were salting the meat. You also find information concerning the fact that you have to remove the tendon of the meat. The Muslims do not have to do this. It is not required to do this. So what I want to say is that maybe there are more than 6 explicitly Jewish recipes in this cookbook. And this is the case. So we talk about olive oil as a very key element in Sephardic cuisine. This is also the case here, because actually the Jews used to use olive oil, and the Muslims were using rancid butter. It's totally different. And when the Christian came, they used lard everywhere, from the beginning to the dessert, lard everywhere. And there is this question of eggplant. So at the very beginning, in the first 2 years, I said, okay, there are eggplants everywhere. But maybe, I don't know, maybe everybody was using eggplant. I think it's the case. Jews and Muslims were sharing this love for eggplants. Nevertheless, the big difference is then, when the Christians started to rule Spain, they used eggplant as a way to identify Jewish families. And also in literature, I'm going to show you. So obviously, I'm just going to take the example of two recipes. Oh, I already talked about this one, but yeah. So in this, cookbook, Kitab al-Tabir, written in Arabic, at that time everybody was speaking Arabic, not only Muslims. The Jews were also speaking Arabic at that time, just as a reminder. So, and the Christians as well. But the Jews were using Hebrew for the Jewish practices in relation with religion. So in time of praying, the blessing, always in Hebrew, but for, every day in Arabic. This cookbook contains a lot of very special recipes. But among those very special recipes, there is a recipe for rabbit. We all know that Jews actually do not eat rabbit. Nevertheless, this cookbook contains a recipe of rabbit. Well, okay, maybe logical, because a Muslim can eat rabbit. Nevertheless, when you read the process of the recipe, I say the process because in the cookbooks at that time, and for a long time, there is never a list of ingredients. The recipe starts like this, okay? Out of the blue, but in fact, there are like a very short paragraph that deals with dietary recommendations. So, because at that time, food and medicine were totally relating connection. So if you are sick or if you want to be in good health or keep in good health, food should be your medicine. And the author was very knowledgeable, and he was following the principles of Hippocrates and Galen, so Greek doctors. So, anyway, there is a recipe of rabbit, but when you read the recipe, there is no rabbit meat inside. So why a Muslim author would have done that? So if he was Muslim, there was no reason to change rabbit meat by eggplant. They were using eggplant. So the thing was to cook the eggplant and then to use the flesh and to shape the dish as if it was rabbit, but it was eggplant. So this is quite funny, and we really have to think about this, because this is the starting point of how Sephardim had to adapt and find new way to survive and continue their way. And we're in the 13th century. Explicitly Jewish recipes that were not entitled Jewish recipes, because nowadays they are part of our Sephardic heritage, Sephardic cuisine. I can just talk about the murakaba. Murakaba is, if there are Moroccan Jews here, Murakaba is what we call mufleta. So it's what Moroccan Jews used to prepare to celebrate the end of Passover. So this recipe is super clear. You just read and you know this is nowadays someone like me, someone who read the recipe can easily identify that this is in fact the oldest recipe and evidence of the existence of Jewish practices in order to celebrate the end of Passover by the Jews in the 13th century. And this recipe is exactly still the same as today. Maybe the question was, okay, how were you able to identify this recipe as Jewish if it was not in the title? Well, in fact, this is thanks to the process. Because when you make murakaba, it's a very special process. You have to prepare dough, and you have to roll it and out, and you have to make some small disc of some layers of dough, and you have to put it into an iron skillet. You cook it, and then you place another one on the top, and you have to flip both. You put a third one, and you flip the three. You put another one, and you flip the fourth, and you are like building a tower. And then at the end, you have to pour butter and honey, and this is what is prepared for the end of Passover, which is called mimuna. Isfenj is another Sephardic dish. It's like a donut, which is actually prepared by Moroccan Jews as well, mainly for Hanukkah. But at that time, it seems to be prepared by everyone, Jews and Muslims, because nowadays, if you go to Morocco, Isfenj, it's like something you can find everywhere. But Moroccan Jews used to, Moroccan Muslim, you eat Isfenj for, daily, and it's for every occasion. Nevertheless, Moroccan Jews prepare this Isfenj for Hanukkah. So I'm going to talk about, I've been talking a bit concerning eggplant, and I think we talk about the relevance of eggplant, how eggplant was used by the non-Jewish people to identify Jewish families. So we're going to just keep this in mind. Let's switch and talk about another kind of text. You have Maimonides. It's my favorite. I love Maimonides. And Maimonides, so it's called the Rambam. So he was very knowledgeable. He was a rabbi, he was a doctor. He was so knowledgeable. And he wrote, among the different texts he wrote the Mishneh Torah and the commentary of the Mishneh, where you have a lot of references concerning Passover and the practices that one should follow to celebrate, in order to celebrate Passover. Not only concerning the celebration, but concerning also the making of matzah. So in those texts written by Maimonides, we can say that it outlines the specific rules for ensuring that the matzah used during Passover is unleavened. It discusses the timing of eating matzah during the Seder. And he also provides details on the various types of matzot used during this celebration. So at that time, we are in the 12th century. Just forget about the untasty, crunchy, squared matzah. It was absolutely not the case. The Sephardic Jews, and even nowadays, we used to eat soft matzah. And Maimonides knew very well about this because he offers, and you have the recipe in my cookbook, he offers different versions and different ways of making matzah for the different days of Passover. One special matzah, the lechemoni, for the first, and then for the other days of Passover. So in the cookbook, you have a recipe for the Rambam's poor man's bread, lechemoni, for the first day of Passover. Another one for the other day of Passover, which is sweet, and another one which is savory. So this is how the recipe looks like. So you always have at the very beginning I always refer to the text because this is my job. So there is always in relation with the text as an evidence of history of the practices of the Sephardic Jews. So this is the case here, and for every recipe is also here. This one is a bit more crunchy. Good. I like this one. This is my favorite. And this is the third one, which is not sweet. So Maimonides wrote about matzah, but he also wrote about charoset. And everybody likes charoset, right? I'm gonna then, after the talk, I'm gonna show you how to make charoset for your Passover, which is in relation, obviously, with the commentary of the Mishnah, and also in relation with an Inquisition trial. So this is a recipe you will just be able to find the cookbook, and you have all so this is not the recipe itself, so the recipe is just on the other page. Here are all the historical information. If you want to read, you can find all this, how Maimonides knew about making charoset and why he is giving so many details. Among the texts that he wrote, he was a real Sephardic, among all the texts he wrote, there is one which is called so the translation would be the regimen of health. So it's and he was so smart, really. I really recommend you to read. It's very easy and it's so fantastic. So there is a recipe in the regimen of health. It's a book that has been written. Someone asked him to write the regimen of health because in fact it was Saladin and his son was the Prince Avdar was very, very sick and mental health problem. And so he asked Maimonides when he was living in Egypt to write a book for his son because he was totally crazy. And and the medical side. And so, but the first 5 chapters among the, I think, 9 or 12 chapters deal with recommendation for everyone, every kind of recommendation. So I will talk about this maybe after. Among Maimonides' writings, you have a recipe which is in fact something that my grandma used to do. I'm from Andalusia. So my grandma, this is something, I think maybe the first dish she taught me how to do. And when I was reading the regimen of health of Maimonides, I was totally astonished by the fact that it was a chicken soup. It was like, what? So I went to see my grandma and I told her, what? You lied to me? You never invented this recipe? So I'm sure she does not know who is Maimonides. So I think she did not understand what I was getting. But so in this recipe you have a chicken soup. I highly recommend you this recipe, which is totally delicious. So it goes for chickpeas because we love chickpeas. Chickpeas and eggs, we love eggs as well, and broth and carrots and onions, I think. So this recipe is actually part of the Spanish food heritage. I really hate saying Spanish heritage because in fact the Spanish food heritage started when the Christians ruled the country. So this is another, this is an issue. So don't want to talk about this. So and I'm Spanish. I'm just okay. So what is so we are talking about the text and taste. So we have been talking about this in the 13th, 14th century, and then came the Christians. And this is like something that what they really wanted to do is to destroy, using also food what was the Semitic culture of Spain during the 1st century to the 15th century. And how did they do? They used food as a political tool. Maybe it could be like a bit crazy for you to think that food can be used as a tool, but food is totally politics. Really, nowadays it is, but it was already the case at that time. And they unfortunately were very smart and they knew very well about this. So what I decided to do is just to, obviously, I was about to read and making some research concerning the cookbooks that have been written since the 15th to the 17th century. So maybe there was this continuity and I was able to find Jewish recipes under a very complex context, because at that time, the Christians started to rule officially Spain since the end of the domination of Islam in Spain. I mean, the 2nd of January, but 1492. But in fact, what did the Catholic monarchs is that they created the Inquisition in 1478, and this is what totally destroyed our culture. So, in short, we are going to talk about different kinds of texts. First, cookbooks. Okay, what cookbooks written under Christian domination say? We're going to talk quickly about literary works. What do novels tell us about Jewish food practices? This is very interesting. Then we are going to talk about special foods that are like signs or markers of Jewish food identity. And then we are going to talk about Inquisition trials. So, in short, among all the cookbooks that I was able to read during my PhD doctorate, I mean more than 1,000 recipes through 11 cookbooks. First, they have nothing to do with the cookbook that contains explicitly Jewish recipes. Absolutely nothing to do. Second, nothing to do because they do not contain any eggplant, they do not contain any cilantro, they do not contain any olive oil, only lard everywhere. So this was a very, because among 1,000 recipes, you can find absolutely nothing about this. This is really, a desire from the Christians, the monarchs, to erase everything. You have, so at that time, it was really the starting point to see food as an ideological instrument, as a tool for criticizing it was in fact an anti-Semitic society. So we have to keep in mind this. This is something very important because nobody wants to talk about this. So at that time, people were already wearing clothes that were that allowed the Christians to identify the people as non-Christian, as Jewish people. So now at that time, we also know that during this anti-Semitic society, we have a lot of interesting information that deals with food. And one of the first one, you can find them, in fact, those evidences in the novels. In short, so you have here, so Considerare del siglo XV, so it's like different kinds of, like poems, written so in the 15th century. So you have the translation here. This is the original document. So at the wedding of the Al-Hama is the Jewish quarter, but this word Al-Hama was also used for the Muslim quarter, but in this case, it's the Jewish quarter. So it tells the story of a wedding that happened in the Al-Hama, in the quarter. So, and the person said that nothing hairy was eaten. Hairy, everybody knows what, okay? So, nor fish without scales, but as the bridegroom was able to a lot of eggplants and saffron with Swiss chard and whoever said Jesus during the meal, let him eat no albondiguillas, no meatballs. So this is a real, so at the very beginning it's quite funny, but it really reflects what was the society at that time. So what offer literature is using irony, ironical side. They want to highlight how bad were the Jews at that time. And thanks to this information, we know a lot concerning what were the food practices of the Sephardim at that time. So they used to eat a lot of meatballs, they used to eat a lot of saffron, they used to eat a lot of Swiss chard, they used to eat a lot of eggplants, and they were following the kashrut. Because fish without scale and nothing hairy or spiked with spice. So this is interesting. This is another, evidence of the continuity and the relevance to take into account that when people move, food move. So in 1492, it's the edict of expulsion officially of the Jews of Spain. So since 1492, the Jews had to flee Spain, and they had to settle in different other countries. Some of them, obviously, stayed in Spain, and that's why Inquisition, started. But here, it called this text called the Lycian Delusion Woman, tells the story of a woman. So she was from Andalusia, and she was called Aldonza, and her grandmother told her a lot of how to make different kinds of dishes, and among those 21 dishes, and you have the recipes, all the recipes in the cookbook, you have a very special recipe called hojuelas, and so this is the recipe. You know hojuelas maybe, if you are Sephardic, you know hojuelas maybe by other names like fijuelas or fajuelas. So this is like a round shape, like a rose, in fact, that Sephardim used to make for different occasions and mainly Purim. Let's talk about, I think, my favorite source. It could be a bit weird to say that it's my favorite source, because this is the source that show that the Jews were sentenced for being Jewish. And some of them, at that time, were killed and burnt for this. So, the Inquisition is a court that the Catholic monarchs invented creating in 1478 because they realized that there were too more Jews in Spain. And they thought that they were ruling the country and they were very dangerous. So what they did is that even before this, the Jews were the community who had to pay more taxes than other minorities. It has always been the case. And at that time, so the Inquisition started because the Catholic monarchs did not want to have Jews who were saying that they were now good Christians, but they were still practicing Judaism at home. That's what we call crypto-Jews or conversos. So the Inquisition and the Inquisitors did not want this anymore. So they started creating with the Inquisition, and there were a lot of informers and people whose goal was to denounce the Jewish families for their practices. Inquisition trials, it looks like this. So Inquisition trials are texts that reveal all the practices of the Jews. And 80% of the Inquisition trial deal with denunciation for food practices. That's crazy. So this is also a way to understand that food was really a political tool. Because, when you eat, you do not eat only once a day. You have to eat maybe twice. So when you just see and spy for a certain person what your neighbor is cooking, so you can know who he is. And you can also understand even better this when you see that your neighbor is avoiding certain food. So among all the Inquisition trials I have been able to, and I'm still working on this, you have different kinds of dishes. The main iconic Sephardic dish mentioned in a large part of the Inquisition trial, but also nowadays as a food practice, is adafina. Adafina, dafina, schina, chamin, ani, trasnochado, all those names refer to adafina. Adafina should be, like the equivalent at cholent, but it's not exactly the same. Honestly, I'm so sorry, but honestly, I have never tasted a cholent in my life. So someone said, that's quite the same. I'm sorry, I just eat adafina, so I don't know. So adafina is the main one. The main dish mentioned in this and in the Inquisition trial. You have huevos jaminados. Huevos jamados are part also of our Sephardic heritage. They are eggs that have been cooked for a long time, like 6 hours, in the peels of the onions. And then the yolk is very creamy, and the white is a bit dark, and it's so delicious. And we can just make them as a side, but we can also place them in the adafina pot for Shabbat. It is a Shabbat dish. Obviously, a lot of denunciation for eating garlic, a lot of denunciation for eating olive oil, a lot of denunciation for eating eggplant, and even more denunciation for avoiding pork, and lard, mainly lard and pork, and even touching. Touching pork was something that if this person, mainly women, refused to touch pork, or if she was using tongs instead of touching with her finger, this was really like evidence that she was Jewish. Yes. So this is another kind of trial that dates back to the very, very beginning of the Inquisition, and it mentioned the term chamin. Chamin, it's a word in Arabic that refers to something that is hot. Chamin, or schina, comes also from the Arabic schon, which is in fact something hot as well. So this is how it looks like an Inquisition trial. This is also in relation with adafina, and this is also the fact that adafina was recognized in the 18th century as a Jewish dish. Cierto género de guisado que usaban los judíos de España. So a certain dish that the Jews of Spain used to eat, and we are in the 18th century. This is how adafina looks like. So you have this in the cookbook, and this is also how huevos jamados looks like. So just talking about, just to finish. So here, what I really wanted to say is that the Sephardic culinary heritage is very complex. So it has been built over centuries, and the different religious contexts affected the construction of the evolution of the Sephardic cuisine. When you are Sephardic from Spain, or you are Sephardic from Morocco, you are Sephardic from Italy, you are Sephardic from Mexico, because the Inquisition was also in Mexico and in the New World, even if the Catholic monarchs forbade the Jews to travel. because obviously they were totally, they feared about the fact that Judaism could spread and cross the Atlantic. But this is what happened. So Inquisition was also in Mexico. So just to say that there are different kinds of Sephardic cuisine. Nevertheless, we are all together for food practices for the Jewish celebrations. So we celebrate the Jewish holidays, and this was already the case at that time. We celebrate Jewish holidays eating certain kinds of food and avoiding others. And this is why we can talk about Sephardic culinary heritage nowadays. The celebration of the Jewish holidays helped a lot to think about what is Sephardic culinary heritage nowadays. In the Kitab al-Tabikh, you have recipes that are still prepared nowadays. You have couscous, which is also in the Sephardic cuisine of certain people, Sephardic Jewish community. You have muhalabiya, which is like malabi. It also bears different names. You have sambusa, which are like our today empanadillas. You have in the Kitab al-Tabikh chickpea croquettes, super funny. And you have isfange, so this donut. Oh, there are more and more other, food from the 13th century that are still, and that were not identified explicitly as Jewish, but that are still in the Sephardic heritage nowadays. This is murakaba. You have the recipe in the book as well, and this is isfange, so you have the recipe as well. Now, I would like to talk, and I would like to show you how to make a very special charoset, because, Passover is like not in the corner, but almost. And I would like to talk about this recipe. The recipe we're going to make is in relation with an Inquisition trial that dates back to the 16th century, and it tells the story of the Dias Nieto family, so a Portuguese family who had to flee the country and settled in Italy in the city of Ferrara, where they met also other Portuguese Jewish communities. And there, they used to make meatballs of charoset. So those balls and with dates and figs. And Maimonides says in the commentary of the Mishneh that you really want to add very, very short and thin cinnamon sticks, because what you really want to do, because for Maimonides, almost all was symbolical foods. So adding those very thin and short cinnamon sticks was a way to remember the Hebrew, and also because you really want the charoset to be like mud with straw inside. So that's why he decided. So this is what he wrote, and the charoset I'm going to make and that you will taste today contains chestnuts. The Sephardic Portuguese used to make matzah with chestnut flour or just mashing chestnuts. You have the recipes in the cookbook. So in the cookbook we have this recipe and a lot of different recipes to make matzah and a lot of dishes with different kinds of flour. So you have chickpea flour, you have chestnut flour, and a lot of different ones. Now let's make the charoset, okay? So you will see that it's easy to make. So to make the charoset, you have one of our main ingredients, food. So I highly recommend you to use medjool dates for a very simple reason. For me, they are the best. To me, they're the best. But also because if you use medjool dates, you do not have to soak them into water. Because Maimonides said you really want to soak, and it is also written in the trial, the dates, because we want them to be very soft. but using this, you do not have to. So I'm just removing the pit, and so you just have to check how it's inside. Okay, so in the recipe calls for dates. So I'm gonna and this. Then you want to use some figs. So you really want also that they are smooth, so it would be better. So you can do this by hand, but you can also use a food processor. So really, in the 16th century, they did not have any food processor. But, adaptation is in our blood. So you really want, you can use this. So the recipe from the 16th century also calls for raisins. So you can use them. You can use any kind of raisins. It's going to be fine. And obviously, you have here the chestnuts. Honestly, the best would be to use canned chestnut in canned chestnut because they are soft, already cooked, and it's really better. So, and what is also good is that you can just mash them with a fork, and you do not need anything special. Nevertheless, you can just place everything in the food processor. Food processor, my best friend, with the stand mixer. So this is what I'm gonna just mash them like this. As you can see, they are very soft, so it's super easy. And if there are some small chunks, this is even the best, even better. So here. Yes, it's easy. So that's good. Now we have our cinnamon. So what you want to do is we are not going to use a lot. Nevertheless, you can just cut the cinnamon this way. And you really want to use very thin sticks. So when I say really thin, it's like this. So I don't know if you can. Well, it's like, yes, it's very. So this is what you really want to do. So, and then you are going to combine everything because we really want to have like mud for our charoset. So, yes, it smells very well. Cinnamon is also part of our, cuisine. So now you have everything here. You can start chopping everything. And what is interesting with the dates is that they are so soft that you really can, in fact, use the fork instead of this. But I should have used the gloves. Would have been more. Okay. So this is how it's gonna look like. I'm gonna just chop this. And you will have the final result for the tasting just after this. Good. So here we are. What Maimonides says, and also in the trial, is that you need acidity you need to add vinegar in the charoset. So this is what we are going to use as well. So I'm decided to take like apple cider. So to make this. So and now you can combine everything. The food processor is really better. It helps a lot. So even if even more when you do not have time, like now. But that's good. You're gonna see that we made the charoset with the food processor this evening in the kitchen, and you're gonna see that it's more homogeneous, but this is good as well. So the better you chop the Charoset, if you mix the Charoset, or chop the Charoset for a long time, it's going to be better. So what you really want to do right now, I really have to wash my hands, is to add a bit of vinegar. As my grandma used to say this, you have to add a bit. Okay. She used to say this for olive oil. I promise that it was not a bit at all. So acidity is very important. So this is what you really want to do. And then Maimonides says you have to add hyssop. So it's a kind of herb, but actually you need the leaves, the whole leaves, but we only found in powder. This is quite hard to find, so if you do not have this, it's not a big deal. Okay?
Where did you find it?
You can find it. This is because hyssop is like za'atar, but not the mix of different things. In fact, hyssop is really the word that refers to this herb. It's a herb with very thin and long leaves. This is something that you can find fresh, but it's more for the summer period. But you can find it. I think it's not it's not hard to find. It's just not right now. It's not the good period.
I'm sorry, what herb is it?
Hyssop, yes. So you have this right now. So I'm gonna use my hands as fruit processor. It's cheaper, right? So, yeah, thank you so much. So, once you have this, you can cut it again. Just be careful with your fingers. Okay, great. So, we have everything, the chestnuts, we have the dates, we have the figs, we have vinegar, we have cinnamon, we have everything. So, and the hyssop, today as a substitute. So, we have our thing, and now what we want to do is I'm going to show you with just one part and a small amount. So, what you really want to do is to take a bowl here. I hope you can see it. Yeah. So, and to add some almonds. So those ones are already chopped. That's a bit. I do not have, because of my fingers, it's like, yeah. So those are almonds. They are chopped, so it's easier. And then what you want to do is to do the same with your pistachios. And you want to chop them as well. So I'm going to just place this here. And you want to chop them a bit, not a lot. We really do not want like powder or some ground pistachio. We really do not want this. Just chop them a bit. Okay? So I just try to avoid to touch them because of my fingers. So this is how it should look like. And now I'm going to make this. I'm going to take like a bowl of Charoset. I'm going to show you how it looks like here. And then you just have to put it inside and to cut them like this. You can press a little bit so they can just stick to the Charoset. And here we are. So, to me, the best is to place the Charoset balls in a plate like this one, to just use a plastic wrap and to put it into the fridge. You can make them in advance for Passover because they are even better if you make them the day before. So, and with this recipe, you can make a lot of both big ones or a very small one, I highly recommend you to just to use a few amount of Charoset and to make, small ones, so you can eat more. so this is, a good reason, right? Okay, so this is something I wanted to show you. The other thing I really wanted to show you as well was how to make labneh. Everybody. So there is a reason for this. So first because I love labneh, but then also because labneh is related to our history. When we love talking about cheese, but at that time, before the 18th century, the type of cheese used was fresh cheese. So it's very, very easy to make labneh. And Maimonides, but also you can find other texts that mention the making of fresh cheese by Sephardic Jews. So this is something I really wanted to show you. So I'm gonna do this. And when Sephardic Jews were making cheese for them, or in order to sell their cheese, to be able to identify their fresh cheese from the fresh cheese of the others, what they used to do is to take a stamp, and they were just printing it over the top of the cheese. So I do not have stamp here, but I'm Jewish, so So what you need is a cheesecloth. So you just have to place this in the middle. So you really want full fat, yes, fat everywhere. If you take something it's not gonna work. So full fat Greek cheese. The very hard one. So the one that when you open it, you can just place the spoon in the middle and it's not falling. So you just have to taste, because it really depends on the brand, but sometimes you have to add salt and sometimes not. So you really want to taste this before. So you have to take salt. There is just half. So, and to combine everything, you can stir. You want to let it outside for 30 minutes because you want the salt to be dissolved. So after this, I'm just going to show you the process. So when this is done, just have to place your labneh, your cheese here. And what is so important, I just pour a few amount just to show you, and then you have to hang it like this. You have to place it in the fridge. How long? Well, it's really up to you. I like when the labneh is quite hard, so I let my labneh in the fridge for 12, 15 hours. But I think that since 8 hours onward, you can use the labneh. Then you just have to open it. I made some. Then you just have to open it. Ta-cha, and it is like this. So this one is still draining, but you just have to open, and you will see. So it would have required a bit more time. So I can show you. Here we are. Okay? So please don't buy labneh anymore. This is so easy. And then, so I'm going to place it back here. And then I'm going to, in fact, I made some labneh. So you will be able to taste, and I used a lot of different toppings, Aleppo pepper, obviously cilantro, obviously olive oil, and a lot of different herbs. And you will be able to taste it, not with matzah, but next time, but with crackers. So it's not so bad as well. So, well, I really hope you enjoyed this program, and thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? What was the hairy mammal?
The hairy, it was supposed to refer to rabbit. So when it says no hairy, it was nothing with rabbit. This is another reference to the fact that Jews do not eat rabbit.
Presuming that women were illiterate, for the vast majority, these texts would be written by men. Would be read, the cookbooks would be read by men. Do we have any evidence about how it was then translated from men to women who are presumed still Victorian?
You mean in Inquisition trial? I did not hear the Can you just rephrase the? Sorry.
Assuming that women were generally illiterate
Uh-huh.
in the Middle Ages in Spain, the texts were read by men. The cookbooks were read by men.
Yeah.
Do we know anything about how men translated the recipes to women who presumably still did the cooking then as they do today?
Well, in the cookbook, thank you. Well, in the cookbook, so yes, we assume that men used to read the cookbook, but women were still cooking. In the cookbook, in the first one of the 13th century, you have very few references concerning women cooking. It's just not mentioned. So we do not have, more further reference concerning this. But it's an interesting question because it really questions who was cooking. Nevertheless, in the Inquisition trials, there are almost like 99% women who were cooking and denounced by other women. I was able to find an Inquisition trial and it was the man who was cooking, and it was to celebrate Shavuot. But this is the only one I found. Yeah.
How widespread were these cookbooks amongst people?
Well, unfortunately, you mean the cookbook? You mean the first one, or you mean all the sources? Just.
Well, you mentioned like the first one. How?
Yes. In fact, we do not know, but this is very interesting because this cookbook is only known by one copy. Actually, cookbooks are copied several times, like what happened in the Middle East for exactly the same period. Actually, we have like 4, 5, 6, or sometimes more copies of the cookbook, so we can easily understand that the spread is very huge. Nevertheless, for this one, we only know one copy, so I think that maybe the spread is like quite reduced.
Thank you. We're going to invite folks to continue chatting with Hélène over books, and I know there's just one announcement about books, and thank you very much. There's food to taste.
Please go to taste if you want, and I'm here if you want to answer questions. Thank you.